It's a great pleasure to come along to this wonderful venue, which I've been to before, just sitting in the audience. But it's great also that you decided, the Royal Geographical Society, to have this sort of event about Made in Britain. Where is Britain going in terms of manufacturing? And we've got three great speakers, all talking about this subject from really different and interesting vantage points. So I suppose I'm just going to say a few minutes to, or just talk for a few minutes to explain the background to this. As Athol says, I'm a journalist. I've spent many years sort of just going around factories, really talking to people, and this is how I learnt about this, travelling around the world. In the course of that, came up with some ideas about the new industrial revolution, which I've been sort of talking about and trying to ask people about over the last few years. And I do think that this new industrial revolution has got a bit of a potential in the UK, which is where a lot of modern manufacturing started 250 years ago. So it's just going to be a few slides to get us going. I mean, this is something that just seems to be now very much current. A lot of people are getting interested in manufacturing in a way that they weren't a few years ago, partly really because of the effects of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. It made a lot of people around the world, particularly in Britain and America, wake up to the idea that maybe manufacturing, this so-called old field of activity, maybe there was something going on in that. Other things, 3D printing, a lot of new technologies have come in that have made people more excited about this world than perhaps they were a few years before that. I mean, at the heart of it, manufacturing is terribly simple. It's just really four things to go into it. Materials you dig up from the ground, which, from a kind of sort of Royal Geographical Society perspective, you know all about that. There's only a few materials you can dig up, only 150 chemical elements. From that, you get about 10 billion different things per year that people can make. And then you have to throw into it skills, energy, of course, capital. And that's really what manufacturing is about. But the core element to that is human skills, talent, innovation. And we'll be hearing a bit more about that today and where Britain can come in. It is about a sixth of the world economy nowadays. It doesn't employ that many people, only 300 million people or so in the whole world, or 1 in 25 of the population. And so it's never really required all that many people to make this huge array of products. What has become interesting in the last few years is the debate, I suppose, about where things are made. China has steamed away to become the biggest in the world by some way. And in Britain, which was the biggest in 1895, is now number 10 in the league table. You can see from this slide that the green line there is output, and employment is the brown line. As you can see, output has continued to go up, but with a few hiccups, especially around the time of the huge recession. Employment has fallen, which sometimes gives people the impression that manufacturing has completely fallen away in Britain. Well, of course it hasn't. If it's still number 10 in the league table, that's not too bad, considering that it has 1% of the world population. It makes 2% of the world's manufactured goods. So it's still punching above its weight to some degree. But the fact that it was so big 100 years ago, and this narrative of decline that even now you read, oh, manufacturing's sort of dying in the UK, that sort of accentuates the idea that Britain's lost something. In fact, I think it's still got a lot to do in manufacturing and a lot of potential for the future. This, as I say, for those interested in this sort of thing, is the league table. China is the number one. It only took over as the first manufacturing country about 3 years ago. America was the biggest in up until about 2012. America had been the biggest, took over from Britain in about 1900, and stayed in that position for 100 years. And funnily enough, 100 years before that, China was the biggest because it's had more people than anybody else. So China's now come back to being the world's biggest manufacturing country, but it's not surprising really. It's got more people than anybody else, so it's not that big a deal as far as I can see. And then to round off in Britain, I mean, one of the problems here seems to me that there are lots of little companies doing interesting things, not really enough big guns or big aircraft carriers, as I've used this terminology here, to really to have the sort of visibility and the punch that will carry Britain on a bit more. I mean, you don't just want big companies; you want a lot of good small ones as well. But we've got the latter, not enough of the first one. But look, that's all I'm going to say really, because I'm going to just introduce the panel, and they're all going to be given just 10 minutes each to say something from this podium. And I've told them they mustn't speak for any longer than that. And then we'll have a few questions. Then I hope there'll be lots of ideas and thoughts from the audience. And we'll start that at about 8 o'clock. And then after that, we'll finish at 8:30. And then I'm sure for anyone who's interested, the Royal Geographical Society told me they run this wonderful bar here. I don't know if the drinks are cheap as well or what, but that's open for 8:30. So I'm going to just introduce all three of them in one go, really. Will Butler Adams is the man sitting here. He looks quite lean and fit, and that's because he rides his Brompton bicycle pretty much all the time, really, apart from when he's in his factory in Brentford. I've known Will for some time, and this has become a real emblem of British manufacturing. Just about everywhere you go in the world, you see signs of Brompton bicycles, and Will runs the company, has done for a while, and is managing to make a go of making really interesting, solid, expanding, an expanding company in London, which a lot of people think is just not a good place for manufacturing. So it'd be very interesting to hear what he says about how you do all that. The second person going to speak is Eddie Kirkby, who's from the Manufacturing Institute in Manchester. Julie Madigan, the director, had been going to speak. She sends her apologies at last minute. She's had some sort of thing going on and she can't come. But it's great that Eddie's been able to come. Luckily, I visited his Fab Labs, as they're called, a few months ago. These are things, sort of epicenter for 3D printing in Britain. And if you wanted to have anybody in Britain who knows about 3D printing from a very much a practical, hands-on way, it's Eddie, because not only does he run that, he's the sort of steward of a network of these Fab Labs where young people get to try out this new technology. So he's going to talk about that. And then to complement the panel, Simon Middleton, who I also met actually about 18 months ago when he was running this thing called, which I was a bit surprised by really, it was called the Great British Banjo Company. He tells me he does play the banjo, but badly, as he says. But he set this up a few years ago when I was talking to him, and from a background in brand consulting and advertising, and not quite knowing how it was going to go. They're making these banjos in England. It's become a great success, so he's told me that they're making more and more of these, and not only that, they're spreading out into other areas as well, indicating that this idea of made in Britain actually does work and work quite well. So I won't tell you anything more about him because that'll leave nothing for him to say. So I'm just going to now to sit down and hand over to Will Butler Adams for the first 10 minutes.